With me now is Joshua Johnson. He's host of 1A and NPR, also an NBC and MSNBC contributor. And frankly, Joshua, I feel like you try to tackle these sort of issues in that larger, like, we can get into the D versus R and black versus white and men versus women, but we've got this, we're in the middle of something, and we haven't figured out how to both get out of it and how to deal with it.
Well, for sure, we're deep in the middle of something that I think is kind of new territory for a lot of us. I mean, we're just now in the era where we as Americans can say that men who commit acts of assault on women should be treated with zero tolerance. That's new in human history.
Big new. I mean, like in the last couple of years new.
Right.
Yeah.
So we're still navigating that. This era of zero tolerance is a step forward. It shows that more people are saying there are certain kinds of behavior that we no longer consider American. But this is new in terms of, well, what do I do with somebody who I voted for, who I liked, who appeals to me in a lot of other ways? Donald Trump brought this up in the 2016 campaign with some of his more reprehensible comments.
Right.
But the policy agenda that he had that appealed to many conservative Republicans who were willing to hold their noses and vote for him nonetheless. This feels like a similar problem on the political left with something that Democrats have been very serious about, which is race, which is the plurality and the diversity of the country. So this is one of those moments that Dr. King talked about. Dr. King once said, the measure of a man is not where he stands in times of comfort and convenience, but times of challenge and controversy. Right. Now we got a time of challenge and controversy for the Democrats. So did the Democrats do something politically expedient? Do they do something politically risky, allow Ralph Northam to leave, try to figure out what to do with that lieutenant governor slot, get that person elevated to governor, and then brace for a snap election in November? You know, how do the politics of being a Democrat play out in terms of the values of being a Democrat? That's new territory.
And I guess the other part of this, though, is what is a fireable offense? What is a forgivable offense depending on how you handle it in the moment, right? So let's take, we've got Northam and Herring. I guess you could say Herring volunteered it sort of after he knew at this point everybody was going to be looking for it. And you also have this issue of, okay, what about their record while in office? Does that matter when it comes to these things? These seem to be the things we're trying to, and I say we, the collective as American zeitgeist here, we're trying to figure that out. Well, and certainly Democrats are trying to figure that out.
Well, and we should step back a little bit even beyond them and be clear. You know, blackface is one of America's very first pop culture icons. From the very beginning of American pop culture, vaudeville, the very first kind of major icon.
This whole Amos and Andy was this.
Amos and Andy, which was on NBC and CBS back in the 50s. The very first film screened in the White House under President Woodrow Wilson was Birth of a Nation in 1915. The very first talking film was The Jazz Singer in 1927 with Al Jolson in blackface. And it creates pressure, not only, we should be clear, on whites who paint their faces black. Right. It creates pressure on people of color who know what that stereotype is and are under strict orders not to adhere to it in any way, because there's going to be somebody out there for whom that is vestigial cultural memory. There's a song we used to sing in my church that said, Lord, I'm running, trying to make 100, 99 and a half won't do. I hate that song because what it says is the pressure because of images like blackface, because of these stereotypes, even black actors who played into blackface, like Pigmeat Markham and Burt Williams and Stepin Fetchit, is so intense that just the invocation of that image puts you under a microscope. Even though we know you're not that person, what kind of person are you?
Or who do you hang out with? Or who did you hang out with?
Right.
And you're watching Herring, and you're watching Northam, and I don't want to sit here and stereotype a certain era or a certain genre, but you're seeing on Twitter today, somebody randomly went through the University of North Carolina. Not exactly a bastion of what you would have thought racial intolerance. This is Chapel Hill. 1979, there's blackface all over all over there. And as I sent it to a UNC friend of mine, he says, oh, well, that was probably that fraternity. They were known as Confederate Frat, or the Frat Confederacy, or something like that. I'm guessing there are a lot of older white male politicians in the Democratic Party a little nervous today.
There's another aspect of this also, which is that this was in Ralph Northam's med school yearbook. And the medical establishment has a very checkered history with black people as well. There was the Tuskegee syphilis experiment. There was a doctor named J. Marion Sims back in the 1800s who used to do gynecological experiments on slave women without anesthesia. There was Henrietta Lacks, the woman whose cells became so valuable for medical research, the story of the immortal life of Henrietta Lacks. Yeah. So in addition to just the imagery, there's also the fact that he's a doctor that plays into this as well. And then a government official in the seat of the Confederacy that plays into this too. However, speaking of the Confederacy, we got to remember, when Robert E. Lee and Ulysses S. Grant met in April of 1865, Grant let the Confederates leave. They left their weapons behind, they kept their horses, and they were allowed to go on with their lives. So it may be hard to feel forgiveness for someone who denigrates black people. But in our country, we've forgiven people who enslaved black people.
I was just going to say, that is what has been sort of made this work, is that we have found a way to forgive through these things.
But bear in mind, the Confederacy got whooped.
But
so they got there before we forgave.
I do think you can be forgiven and still lose your privilege to be in public office.
Right.
And then I think that is the penalty that I think some of these public servants don't realize.
Robert E. Lee, even once he got forgiven, there was an effort to try to have like a guerrilla war to get back at the Union. Robert E. Lee wanted the Confederate battlefields bulldozed. He wanted no memory of it. He wanted the people who lost to accept their loss and go on with their lives.
There's actually a great story about that I read recently. I know exactly what you're talking about, where he just was like, what are you doing?
Right.
I don't want to be here.
Over with, yeah.
Joshua Johnson. There's a reason I wanted you in this story, and you delivered. Thank you, sir.
My pleasure.
Hello, YouTubers. If you're watching this, it means you've checked out our channel, so thank you. Now do me a favor. Subscribe by clicking on that button down there. Click on any of the videos to watch the latest interviews and highlights from MTP Daily and MSNBC. You can get more Beat the Press content every morning in the First Read newsletter. If you're tired of content that you don't know anything about where it came from, you don't have to have that problem with us. NBC News, MSNBC, MTP, and the Meet the Press mindset right here for you on YouTube. Subscribe now.